Say yes every day to the world and to your heart. Open up your eyes and let your spirit start. Say yes to the dreams you hold inside. Let your soul be your guide.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Wednesday Wisdom. Today, we are joined by the fabulous Carl Monsour. He is the owner of Monsour Mortgage Pros, and he's also an executive coach at 2020 Vision for Success Coaching. Carl, thank you so much for joining us today. And let's just kind of go over what we do on Wednesday Wisdom. We do something from the past, how we apply it to the present, and then into the future. So first up, we would love to hear, what would you say is the best piece of advice that you have ever heard? And please share who gave you that great advice.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me today, Laura. I really appreciate you thinking of me and bringing me into this podcast, which I've enjoyed a few times now. So, I really thought about this question before coming on to this with you today. And I struggled to find one piece of advice, and something that just kept coming up and up in my mind as I was thinking through this was something my previous boss from years back gave me. I feel as like a gift, and it wasn't as much a piece of advice, but it was more of the value and understanding of the power of positive thinking. And I will tell you, in my younger years, before I started working with him specifically, I would have said, "Oh, I don't want to hear all that stuff. That's corny. It's just not me."
That's woo woo, right? Is that like woo woo thinking?
But yeah, and once I started working a little bit more directly with him, and he shared some of his philosophies and how much that was ingrained to his overall success, I started looking at things a little bit differently, and it just really helped me in so many different ways. So
Wow.
it's really, again, going back to the power of positive thinking.
Well, so I want to share something with you because
Yeah.
you of course know I'm all about that, right? So I live
Yeah.
my life that way. And yesterday I was listening to a podcast because I love feeding my brain all the time with different things. And I stumbled across a gentleman. I had never heard of him before, and he's a physicist. And he was giving a podcast about the power of when people come together collectively and think positively. So there is a whole new thing happening in business, which I'd never heard of before. Like, this was like revolutionary to me,
Yeah.
where you get people to come together, right? So a company, a team, a family, whatever, right? And you all come together, all thinking with that vision and that mindset of whatever that outcome is, right? Positively thinking, not thinking about, oh, it's going to be challenging to hit that number, or, oh man, I don't really have all the answers of how we're going to get there. It's more of that we're all working collectively for whatever that future looks like, positively coming together. And this man has done an entire thesis and an entire like documented research on how effective and how it actually works.
That
So
sounds awesome.
like what you just said, years ago, if this was 15 years ago, people would be like, oh my goodness, like I can't believe these people are even speaking about this, but
Yeah.
not anymore. It is mainstream now. So now let
Yeah.
me get you to that second question. Now I need to know, you heard this, you kind of dismissed it and was like, yeah, I know. Try to have a positive mindset. But now I want to hear from you. How have you taken that and applied it? How have you applied that to your business, to what you're doing, to your personal life? How are you applying it?
So here's how I'm going to answer that. I would say the one thing that gave me back then, and still to this day that I'm still applying, is it gave me perspective. And I think that's applicable, especially if we're coming out of 2023, because I learned not to get too high, not to get too low, and try to keep things in perspective. And how that ties in to the power of positive thinking is that I always looked at it as either you're going to be this fluffy guy who everything is roses and your head's in the clouds, or you're kind of this negative guy, maybe a little bit more realistic, as they call it, And I found that as more I got into this positive thinking and really expecting good things to happen, it gave me a piece of feeling more peaceful, because it gave me perspective to not get too high, not get too low. So I hope that makes sense, because it's hard to explain how one of powerful, positive thinking goes into keeping you into more of a good perspective long term. But that's absolutely what it did for me, especially coming out of last year. Last year was a difficult year for many people, including myself. And as I look back, I never really did get too high, or I never really got too down and too low. I know we're going to get through this, and I always kind of kept it kind of in the middle, if that makes sense. And that wouldn't have happened if I didn't apply some of that positive thinking perspectives
So
that
what
I've
do
used.
you do, Carl, on a daily basis? Like, what are some things? So, and I totally agree with you. Our whole life as a whole shouldn't be highs and lows, right? It shouldn't be swings from one to the other, right? You have to be
Yeah,
somewhere in that middle so that you're not crashing, right? But from the lows, or you're not always chasing the highs, right? It
yeah.
needs to be somewhere in that balance. But what do you do? You know, what are some tips for our audience of the way that you keep yourself, number one, in a positive perspective? Well, let's combine those two words, a positive perspective.
hmm So a couple things that I do that's helped me through the years is, and again, I know this might not resonate with some people, but goal setting's big for me, because that keeps me focused on where I want to go. And I look at them literally, and this is no joke, I look at my goals every day. So that's one thing. And then I have a pretty good routine every morning, where I have this little sheet of paper that reminds me of 5 things that I'm doing every morning to get my day started off in the right direction. I'll give you a quick, on a side note, a quick tidbit. Look up Ed Foreman and How to Have a Terrific Day. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ed Foreman. He's an
I
older
have
guy,
not.
since passed, but he has this whole premise on how to have a terrific day every day. And he's hilarious, by the way, but I took a lot of tips from some of his training. But one of the things is to expect good things to happen, start your day with those expectations. So, I start with a couple of things where I think about, what am I most grateful for? Then I look at my goals, and then I look at my whiteboard, my calendar, and then I put together a good battle plan for the day that's focused on the things that I want to happen. So, between the goal setting and, just the way I start my day, I think that helps me kind of stay in perspective and stay grounded, even when things aren't going great.
Right. Well, I mean, what is that expression about? If you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. Like, what's that? You know that expression where about having a
Yeah. Oh,
plan? I
yeah.
mean, you're setting yourself up with a plan every single day. You can't just wander through life and think that you're going to stumble across where you're
Yeah.
trying to go, right? You have
Yeah.
to have that routine. You have to have those plans. And, it's fascinating about gratitude. That's another thing that people think that's just, oh, everybody says about gratitude. It's proven in our brains that you cannot be anxious and grateful at the same time.
Yeah.
It actually is not possible. So when there is that moment where you feel overwhelmed, or that moment where it's like, man, I'm just, I'm trying so hard and I'm really trying to get there, having that moment of gratitude, and gratitude doesn't have to be, I'm grateful for this big, humongous thing. I mean, a matter of fact, going to our 2020 connection, Mo Daniels, she shared a story on one of our webinars where she said when she was going through the most difficult time in her life, she would say, I'm grateful I have heat in my apartment. I'm
Yeah.
grateful I have lights.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be a grandioso, I'm grateful for my Mercedes and my boat. It can
Right.
be, I'm grateful it's warm in the
Yeah.
winter inside my home, you know?
Well, and that
So
that to me, that goes back to perspective, because the things that I'm talking about, saying out loud to myself in the morning, is not about material things. It's usually
yeah,
about my kids, or, how they're doing, or my health, or,
yeah.
the smaller things that we can take for granted sometimes.
The most important things, the
That's
things
right.
that truly matter.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No,
Exactly.
no doubt.
Wow. I love this. And you see, it's funny. I was telling you before we started recording that I kind of noticed that each guest has their own topic, like something that they're drilling into. And I love the fact that we've kind of found perspective is the thing that we're kind of zeroing in on. And I love
Yeah.
that. I absolutely love that. All right,
Yeah.
Carl, this has been phenomenal. Great insights. Love the wisdom. Now
Yeah.
I'd like you to wrap us up with what is your piece of advice that you would like to share with everyone today?
Awesome. Well, I'll use a quote that I love, which is focus on what you want to happen, not on what you don't want to happen. So, and I feel like the timing of this is so great because last year, as I was working through some different things, both personally, but also through my coaching with other students, a lot of people were just kind of down and out and focusing on, rates are higher, focusing on the problems. Instead of focusing on what they want to happen, they were too much looking at what they didn't want to happen. And that's a mental shift that you have to make if you want to have success, is focusing on what you want, not sitting and dwelling and thinking about what you don't want. In fact, I use this quote with my son who's in baseball. He's 12 years old, so he's going through some things, trying to figure some things out. And I always tell him, listen, when you go up to bat, think about what you want to happen. Don't worry about getting hit by a pitch. Don't worry about striking out. Get all that stuff out of your head and focus on immediately when that ball's released, I'm going to get a hit. So I'm even taking it to that level of, it can make a big difference, not only just our adult life, but, I'm trying to teach my kids some of these things as well.
Very valuable, extremely valuable, because we know the outcomes in our life, a lot of it starts here. It
Yeah.
starts in our mind. And if you can teach those lessons, to the younger generation and put them on that path to realize the power of that, that really sets them up for the whole rest of their entire lives. And we
Yeah.
know, right? We know that when adversity is happening in our life, our brain wants to protect ourselves, right? It wants to protect
Absolutely.
us. And so we're thinking over and over and over about, oh, I can't get a deal, or oh, I'm going to struggle to make that payment of whatever's coming up, or oh, I'm so worried that my best loan officer might leave my team, right? They might get
Right.
recruited and go to another company, right? But what we don't realize is that the more we're focusing on the loan officer going to another team or not being able to make that net or what's happening, that's what we're bringing in. That's what we're
Yeah.
attracting. And that's what is going to be replicated and multiplied.
Yeah.
So how do you, Carl, I want to give some tactical advice again. How do
Yeah.
you switch that? Let's use the example of I'm afraid my best loan officer is going to be recruited. Let's use that as our example, right?
Hmm.
So here I am. I'm worried that Bob, my best LO, he's kind of, keeping my whole branch alive. He's the one making it so that we're profitable. Man, I'm so worried that Bob might get wooed from somebody that could lure him over, and I can't get this out of my mind. What
Yeah.
would you recommend that person do in that situation?
So in that specific situation, I would recommend not focusing so much on those negative thoughts because anybody could be recruited away at any given time, right? But focusing more on the relationship that you have with them, focus on giving them additional tools and training. One of the things I'm big on when you're working with a team or loan officers is make sure you're working on individual motivation. You're motivating them, leading them by examples, and really just focusing on the things that will help the relationship and help them stay there long term rather than the negative thinking that's going to lead to weird decisions and activities with them and conversations with them that aren't going to be fruitful or helpful. Instead focusing again on what you want to happen, which is they stay long term because of all the good things that you're doing with them and for them. I mean, you can't
Agree.
control somebody else, and you can't want it more than they want it. That's definitely true as well. So you can do your best as a manager, train, motivate, lead by example, and hopefully good things will come from it. And you build longevity and you build relationships that last long term.
Exactly. Great advice. Carl, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with all of us. We truly
Yeah.
appreciate it, and we wish you all the best always.
Yes. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate you having me again.